Hey there, folks. Andre, the Game Idea Guy here. First thing I want to say off the bat, I apologize that this took a month and a half to come out. Look, my main computer, the GPU failed on it, and I've been trying to get my data off of the drives, but I don't have anything to connect to the drives in that computer because the drives they didn't fail. It was the GPU, which I got to replace at some point. So I have to use my laptop, which admittedly I was planning to use for low spec gaming videos, but well, I have two laptops, but the better one is the one I'm using for this. So I do apologize for that. First thing I'm saying is I am not re-recording everything I recorded originally because I had over an hour's worth of content. I'm not doing it again. So I'm going to try to give this as shorthand as possible. No reason it was over an hour because I responded to comments. I am not doing direct comment responses. I'm going to give you the best summary of what I remember. And that's what we're going to do. Next thing is I know that Nintendo lost on a point during the lawsuit, which is perfectly fine. That's something that could happen, and I think I may have said it in the previous video for it. Either way, that's one of the contingencies that would work for if PocketPair 1 is if there was contingency to take the Pocket Souls mod out of that, like discard that particular point, because that's the illegal mod, technically. And I say that because Namco Bandai is staunchly against mods. They have been for a while. They may allow some to persist, but they don't actively engage with the community with mods. That can change in the future, but right now, as far as we know, that's their stance on mods. That's why my point was hammering in on that as being the problem. I didn't talk about the other stuff because the other stuff wasn't a problem. If people want to point out that there are mods that there are companies that work with the community for mods. Those mods are made within guidelines. They have rules to them. They're authorized unofficial works. But Namco Bandai's mod, not Namco Bandai's, but the mod on Dark Souls 3 Pocket Souls is unauthorized. Authorized derivative works, that's what I was thinking of. It doesn't have permission to exist. Those where the company works with the community and says, hey, yo, you can do these things with our game, those are authorized. They're allowed. Sometimes they'll allow them to sell. I know Minecraft is good for that, where they'll let you build up an economy, basically, of making mods and selling them. I think that was done with the Elder Scrolls too. I don't remember for sure, but I think it was done. I do know it supports mods and allows mods. And I think there was Arc that does that as well. So it's not the issue with mods existing, it's whether or not they are allowed by the company that owns the IP. If they're allowed by the company that owns the IP, then sure, that's not a problem. Now, let's get into the other thing. Everybody's idea of what's going to happen with Nintendo winning. Under the current circumstances, if the Pocket Souls mod is left in place and Nintendo wins, people's major concern is that Nintendo is going to basically going to heavily abuse patents. One, I don't think that they have heavily abused patents. Two, patent cases cost way more money to push and attempt to win. And I doubt that they would want to constantly do that, even if they have the money for it. I don't think that they would want to. because that will eventually become a drain on resources. But there's the caveat here that if they do win and you have that Pocket Souls mod in there, anyone that can use this for case law could point back and say, hey, there's an illegal mod in that. That's why that case was failed. That's why my video was talking about they have to lose the case, because you don't argue the tiniest details. You may blow the tiny detail up to make it bigger than it is, but you don't argue the tiny detail by itself. You use it to dismiss the whole case, because otherwise there's no point in you attempting. So it's not that Nintendo is going to argue and say, yo, hey, take that out, and then their case is legal. Why would they do that? They're not going to do that to themselves, and you wouldn't do that to yourself if that was the position you were in. That was the standpoint I was arguing from. Though most people didn't even get that far, to be honest. People just saw the title, heard something in the beginning that they didn't like, and didn't listen further. So that's the majority of people. But when I look at it, like, again, looking at how argumentation is done, legal argumentation gets to be very nitpicky, and you try to get a case dismissed off of the tiniest detail if you possibly can. That's just how they do things. And I didn't even think about this being in a Japanese court. For some reason, I was thinking it was in the US, so some of the rules may not even apply the same way. But I do think that the outcome of this case will functionally be able to be used in the US court. I could be wrong. Someone can correct me on that. But just looking at it in a general sense, as long as the Pocket Souls mod is in there, there is a problem. Now, if PocketPair takes that out, that problem is removed. At that point, they can win and it wouldn't be an issue. It would be a very clean win. Again, that's why I argue against the use of Pocket Souls, because Namco Bandai is staunchly against mods. And just looking at this from this perspective, they have a decent partnership with Nintendo right now. If a mod on their game is used to hurt a partner, which could come back and hurt them, there may be retribution for it. That's why my concern is the usage of copyright laws and copyright infringement in general, because it can cause problems. And I've been basically just arguing for letter of the law, pretty much. I know that's going to be like the thing that people don't get, but then again, I was also arguing it from a US perspective, so again, it may not apply. But when there are legal experts going online saying, yeah, this counts as prior art, technically it doesn't, because it's illegal. It technically does not, because it's illegal. I can't take the Mona Lisa, make a copy of it, and then draw something else on it that's slightly different and sell it as my own artwork. I stole that at that point. That's infringement. That's the point. And mods that are unauthorized fall into that category. So again, for me, PocketPair removes the Pocket Souls mod from the argumentation. And they say, strike that. We don't need that. We're not going to even consider that. When we've got all this official work and we've got all these authorized derivative works of fans that we can lean on, we're going to remove that because that's the weak link to our argument. That in and of itself is the weak link to their argument. That's why I look at it and say, hey, if that's left in there, there could be catastrophe following that. Because that's the weak link. And that's something that has to be carefully curated. And I don't know if their legal team understood that that wasn't authorized by Namco Bandai, but just because its existence is slightly allowed doesn't mean it's authorized. Again, that's something to be careful about. So that was my major argumentation. That was my major contention. And that is the reason why I contended it. And I don't want people to overlook that because that's an important detail. If you overlook that just because you dislike Nintendo, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Simple as that. Let's even forget about PocketPair's reputation in Japan, because in Japan people don't like them. Over here, people do like them. So it's a flip. But you shouldn't be looking at it, oh, the big company is hammering down on the little company. Look at what the argument is first, then worry about what else is coming afterwards. That's the more important thing. Now, again, I'm not looking at the comments because it took me so long the last time I recorded it. And I'm trying to make this a one and done thing because I restricted myself from doing all my other content until this was done. And I was getting annoyed because I couldn't get my files back, which pissed me off. So I'm one and done in it here. Going to try to comment about the comments I remember because I'm not reading back over all of them, because when I did it, I did read them, which is what took forever. There was someone that did bring up the ARC thing, and I acknowledged that earlier. Someone said I was a fanboy, didn't listen to people in the comments, but if you look at the comments, you actually read the comments, you can tell that I was responding back to what was said. The things that I did ignore were hyperbole. You don't have to respond to hyperbole. Why would I respond to hyperbole? Especially when the person that's making the hyperbole knows that it's hyperbole. Why would I respond to that? And they understood that when I made that point. So there's no point in me going back and forth with them over that. So it's like, oh, the sky is green. Okay, that's untrue. Why am I going to worry about that statement? Like, well, they said we can't have candy, so the sky is green. Why would I respond to the sky is green when someone said you can't have candy? The can't have candy is the thing I'd be focused on. The sky is green, which has nothing to do with the candy, I'm not worried about. Maybe that's not the best analogy. Probably not. But people saying that basically going into patenting air and breathing and all that stuff, we know that that wouldn't be patented. One, that because there's no logical way you can patent that to make sense unless you make the game's sole mechanic about how breathing and respiratory systems work, and it is a function of the game to know how that works, and that's what you're using to control it. And I think Manuel, what was the game? Manuel Samuel, something like that, had a mechanic where you had to manually breathe. But I don't think that's patented because it was just a button press. It's not like an in-depth, detailed thing. But again, I think it just depends on how deep the detail is. Shoot. There was a comment that just kind of used the fact that I used an AI thumbnail. Like, okay, I used an AI thumbnail, but I actually spoke. The thumbnail was because I didn't find anything that I really liked as far as pictures for it. So I just prompted something and went with the best representation of what I thought. So if that's your reason for dismissing someone, then you're kind of losing the plot, because that has nothing to do with the discussion itself. And I think I did cover the majority of their major points, so it's no point me really going into that comment if I can even remember everything specifically. I know that they were agitated, maybe not like mad, but just like disgruntled maybe, but it's not the biggest thing. That was a long comment though. And I think that they had several points, and I'm trying to remember all of them, because again, I'm not reading through everything again. I'll try to remember that one as I'm going along. I don't want to have a big dead air area. There was one person that basically said what I said, but got likes, and I'm sitting there, I was like confused. Like, you said what I said, so did you even listen to the video? Like, because you didn't really change what I said. It's just a couple things that are different. But it's like, okay, but I said that. Did anybody not listen beyond the 2-minute mark? Like, the majority did. I can tell you by looking at the analytics, I think the majority dropped off at about 1.5 minutes in. And that's unfortunate, because sometimes when you put these discussions out, even if you know it's not a popular position, you want to be able to discuss with people and go and actually talk with them about it. But to have a bunch of people come in, drop it, and bounce out, I was like, okay, well, it got views. It got a lot of watch time, but I think that was just because people did hate watching for the most part. So, gosh, I really, you know what? I'm pausing for a second because I do want to address a couple things because I think that they were important. So I'm not going to do the whole comment, but I'm going to give it a quick look over and get the gist of it. Okay, so I did a quick go over. Their point was that it was about the mechanics, and we all agree that it's about the mechanics, but it's how the mechanics are being used to represent things here. PocketPair allowing people to mod was not my point, and I didn't have an argument against PocketPair allowing people to mod. Again, for them, that's an authorized derivative work. My point was that they were using an unauthorized derivative work among all of the authorized stuff that they have, which it's like saying this illegal thing has the same legal power as a legal thing. That's the big problem. It's not that PocketPair is the bad guy because of what they said for their argument. Is this argument here is going to cause problems. This thing here in your argument is going to cause problems. It's going to cause issues. That's the big problem. And again, people didn't hone in on that. That's why I even brought up the whole Art of War comment. Because people are looking at just the case as a whole, but they're not looking at the thing that's causing the problem. Because again, it's more get mad at Nintendo, but not pay attention to the complete argumentation of the people we're rooting for. That's the problem. If everybody on the whole said, hey, could you take that out? I'd have nothing to argue about. Because I haven't seen that said by anyone. Because to me, that's a problem. Because again, it's unauthorized. It's not the same as something like Capcom giving, I don't remember the guy's name, but Capcom allowing Mega Man X Street Fighter to be created, or Street Fighter Cross Mega Man to be created. It's not the same thing. Capcom endorsed that. It was a project that Capcom fully endorsed. That makes it an authorized derivative work. Because it's not there, it's not Capcom making the game, it's not Capcom licensing the game, but it's Capcom allowing it to be publicly, it's allowing it to publicly exist and giving permission for it to be distributed. They gave their approval of it. They gave their blessing. That's what the difference is. Then I think there was a person that said that Nintendo can't patent monster hunting or monster capture, but that wasn't the patent. It was the method in which it was done, like the set of things that they patented together, which was the argument, not monster capture in general. There are monster capture games on Nintendo's platform besides Pokemon. There have been for multiples of their platforms at this point. So that wasn't the actual argument. So if you're going to make that comment on the actual argument. That again tells me people didn't listen. They saw, some people saw, made a comment that they didn't like, or not saw, some people heard, a comment from me that they didn't like and just immediately went to comment and then left it off at that. There was another conversation that went on between a couple people where at the end of it, the guy says Nintendo lost. They lost a point in the case. They didn't lose the case. So again, this is where we got to pay attention to what's going on. When it comes down to stuff like that, that's majorly important. Pay attention to what they lost. They didn't lose the whole case. They lost a piece of the case. That's not the same thing as losing the case. They could still lose the case, but that's losing a piece of the case. And again, if the judge were to go ahead and say, hey, PocketPair, yo, this thing here, this is illegal. You can't have that in there. We're going to strike that thing from it. That solves the problem. But it really wholeheartedly depends on if the judge does that, like they did with the point that Nintendo lost. If they don't do that, there's a potential problem. That was what I was highlighting. Now, if people dislike me for highlighting that, cool, I don't care. But at least at this point, I'm just trying to make it make sense for the people that, you know, probably didn't listen in. And most probably won't listen to this one. So even then, I feel like I might be wasting effort. But at the same time, I'm at least putting the effort in and trying to be as straightforward about it as possible. Was I potentially heavy-handed? Maybe. And I think there was one person I want to address because we did have a conversation back and forth. They said I should restructure my argument. The argument didn't need to be restructured because the point was that PocketPair was using Pocket Souls, the mod Pocket Souls, as part of their argument. As I said, when you're going against a legal argument, you want to take down the whole argument. You want to stop the whole argument. That's why I say if Nintendo wins under the current circumstances, it would remain status quo, because anyone paying any attention legally and who researches this case could go back and look and say, oh, that right there was the linchpin to why they lost. That there is illegal. If someone else has a similar case or PocketPair was to retry the case and they took that bit out, they'd be golden because they could use that argumentation. That's my point. Now, if people understand that or not, again, that's wholly up to them. That is wholly up to them. But letter of the law, which is what I'm pointing to. Since patent law doesn't have any sort of discretion about the legality of a work, the thing that is most closely connected to, which is copyright law, says that unauthorized derivative works have no legal standing, which would mean that it wouldn't count as prior art. That's the point. But again, they're trying this in Japan, which I didn't even think about at the time. So it may be completely different. I don't know what their laws say specifically. And to be honest, I don't have the time to really sit down and try to go through all of their laws and have everything translated. Just currently, that wouldn't work out for me very well. So I condensed everything I could into this to actually get something out, because I was irritated that all of my files are stuck and I wasn't going to let this particular point go because I said I was going to do it, and I'm sticking to my word. But secondly, I know this video isn't going to get as much viewership as the first one. It wouldn't have anyway. The follow-up was never going to get as much viewership as the first one. But the specific people that may have argued might come back and listen, and maybe we find some common ground on that. So at that point, I think it works itself out. Now, if there's another major thing I missed that may be important, I'm fine with being notified of that. I don't mind being wrong. What I do mind is not being direct and authentic about myself. But I don't mind being wrong. Wrongness can be corrected. Inauthenticity burdens you on your as a person. So if what I think is wrong because my information is incorrect, then that's one thing. But I really wanted to get this particular thing out the way. So with this said, I can actually move on to some other stuff, some stuff I'm actually interested in, and stuff that's fun to me. So thank you everybody that got this far. Keep your eyes and ears out for more stuff from me, and until the next time, enjoy your games and peace out, folks.